Hello everyone. Welcome to the presentation on cross-framework compliance and assessment. Um, if you're watching this presentation, there's some assumptions being made that you have a general concept of developing assessments and audit programs. And you should also be familiar with the objectives in the customized approach for PCI DSS version 4. Now, if you're not familiar with the customized approach and you have access to the PCI Security Standards Council Global Content Library, I recommend going and watching the customized approach. Is it right for your company first, and then come back for this presentation if you're watching recording. If you're here today live, then I certainly recommend you go back and look at that. I'm Ron Tosto with Servadus, Cybersecurity by Design consulting company. We support PCI DSS along with multiple other frameworks. And you'll see my credentials here, and if there's been in the business for a good while. So let's look over a few housekeeping. If you're here, you're a participant, your microphones and your cameras are turned off. If you have questions, use the Q&A at the top on the top row. Grab a cup of coffee, and then we recommend putting on some kind of a do not disturb mode on for your device as we go through the topics today. So now to really get started, right, these are the 4 items we're going to talk about today. Really, how do we get from the objectives to an assessment for PCI DSS? Some of the known uses for PCI DSS beyond cardholder data. Talk about a little bit about how matching objectives and what that looks like as opposed to matching objectives to requirements. And then how you can use building requirements and testing procedures to really make a difference for you. Now, for several years, companies have struggled with following multiple standards and multiple regulations. We've heard terms like audit fatigue come out as different companies follow different standards. And so, for example, a U.S. company that has to meet SOX requirements as a public company, companies that support Department of Defense have to do CMMC, in addition to an international companies doing ISO 27001, GDPR. And so you really get these regulations that overlap. So no matter the situation for the company, the goal is to have a common security practice for the frameworks and for development, implementation, and processes. Now, in the past, the PCI DSS had released a mapping between controls for the PCI DSS and the NIST 853. Now, that was very interesting, is that at the time, the version of PCI DSS that was in effect only listed the requirements. It didn't actually list the objectives. In the 853, the controls are really based on the objectives of the control. So and at the time, now we call this approach the defined approach. Here's the requirements, here's the tests, but the objectives weren't part of the program. So we really appreciate now having the opportunity to see the objectives in 4.0 as the PCI Security Standards Council introduces the customized approach, and which requires everyone to have access to the objectives to make their own custom approach. And so we're going to look at this. So now there's some other really ways as we talk about the first piece, right? Here is really a moving from the objective to the assessment on PCI DSS. And so, as I said, a defined approach is really what we knew in the past from versions 3 and earlier, is we have the particular requirements and we have the test. But to get to the entire piece, it's really getting into the middle, or getting from one end to the other end on the customized approach. And so, for an example, you'll see here, right, the customized approach objective for PCI 8.3.1 is right. An account cannot be accessed except after a combination of identity and identification factor. And so if you look at 853, or the long one, NIST Special Publication 853, Revision 5, as of the day we're doing this session, is if you look at IA2, it really matches in that you must have completed identification and a single factor authentication. And so this is an opportunity for us to match the objective to objective. And so, from the beginning, the PCI DSS provided a polished set of requirements and testing procedures to support the assessment, but and as changes occurred to the standard, it addressed new changes to threats to the CDE and the card data environment and the card holder data. Now, while the community has not seen the objectives in the past version, the objective has always been a part of developing the requirements. And so this is where we really have the opportunity to take advantage of having the having the objectives included in the requirement, even though if it's listed as customized approach, it really is the objectives on a singular basis. Now, as we talk about, you think about this really in being able to match objectives to objectives, even in the past when I mentioned the council had previously released a mapping, it was really a mapping from requirements to objectives and not objectives to objectives. Now, there's some other companies and organizations that have used the PCI DSS standard to protect other information other than cardholder data or the card data environment. So let's just take a look at those. And so here is three, EI3PA, the Swift CSP, and Adobe's CCF, or Common Control Framework. And so the EI3PA is really the Experian independent third-party assessment. And Experian did very simple. They said, hey, let's just take the PCI DSS, follow the standard, except the information that we're going to protect is critical credit rating information. And so if you think about those they're familiar with the data security standards for PCI. If you go to page 4, it says here's cardholder data, or here is the sensitive authentication data. This is how it's protected. This is what track 2 data is. And it falls under the PCI DSS. So really to use EI3PA, use the PCI DSS standards for EI3PA, you would really take and draft up an equivalent to page 4 is exactly what information you're protecting with credit ratings. In the United States, of course, that would relate to social security numbers. And then really what's the related other PII or personal identifiable information, such as address, phone numbers, nicknames, that would go in part of the credit report. And so and this is probably the simplest way you've seen it, where organization just says, hey, we're going to use the entire standard as written with just a replacement of what data we're going to protect and what environment we're going to protect in it. Swift, if you're not familiar with Swift is organization is internationally known for wire transfers between financial communities. There's some other organizations that are part of Swift that are not in the financial organization, but are usually large global organizations. And so the Swift customer support program is around protecting data related to financial wire transactions. And so it really gets into, Swift has currently, again, as of this presentation, 32 objectives. And so Swift has taken those objectives and matched them originally with an earlier version of PCI DSS. So the Swift objectives were being matched to the PCI DSS requirements. And so they're protecting the information. But Swift has also understood that from a audit and assessment standpoint, it's really recommended following somebody that's got a qualified security assessor credentials and experience to do their assessments. The last area is the Adobe Common Control Framework. Not a lot of people know this, but Adobe specifically has to follow the SOX standard as an international company. They follow the ISO 27001, and they process, transmit, and store and provide security for credit card data. So they also follow the PCI DSS. And so overall, this is a governance, risk, and compliance program for them. Now, Adobe has actually released the Common Control Framework. So if you like to learn more, you can do a simple search for the Common Control Framework by Adobe. I think they're on their fourth edition of what they released publicly. And so they've actually taken the time to take the Common Control. They've taken the requirements for PCI 3 and earlier, the objectives of SOX and the objectives and for the 27001 standard and matched them. And so they really took that to the level of, okay, just in these three specific common controls, what is the policy that would expect it of the company to meet all the objectives of each of the common controls frameworks. But this is really one of the reasons that we make this an example is it is not a apples to apples comparison. And so that PCI did follow the requirements while the other two frameworks really was focused on the objectives itself. And so this is one of those pieces that they were protecting cardholder data as well as other critical assets within the organization in a single fashion, and so that they get into that they can do a single assessment in multiple places. So, really gets into now that we have this first opportunity to follow common objectives and not requirements to objectives or as it has been in the past. And so you take your, at least two or more frameworks. In this particular example, you see three of the larger circles that represent a framework. And so it could be PCI DSS, NIST CSF, ISO 27001, your SOC 2 assessments. And so you really take those objectives, starting with a common control, or starting with the customized approach objectives from the PCI DSS, and then move forward with your matching the objectives. Now, to make the maximum impact, you would like to have all three standards have overlapping objectives, but understand that you may actually have only, in this example of three frameworks, you could have two frameworks that have common objectives. And so you can still get into the control that has one objective between the two frameworks, and still do a single view of doing the assessment moving forward. So this really allows you to do the match on and what that looks like. And so as you get into the framework in this, so what really is the ideal state, right? Is finding the common objectives. Really is, it's a three-step process. This is a standard process. Have your objectives, develop your requirements, and write your test plan. And so when you can follow common objectives, and even though the requirements written from the PCI DSS are expected to protect cardholder data and the card data environment, if your other framework, such as 853 or CSF, has a matching common objective, then you can really look at the requirement as it's written in the PCI data security standards and to determine if that test as written will suffice for the data and the environment that you're protecting under a separate framework. If the frameworks are really matched, then you really move forward into okay, this is our requirement. And if you can use the requirement, then you can also use the test to go with the requirement and save a large amount of time. And if for some reason there is you look at your requirements, says, okay, the requirement doesn't really match. From a PCI DSS standards, you still have the ability to take the customized approach objective and then go through, do your targeted risk analysis, develop the requirements yourself, develop a test plan for your PCI DSS, but also make it in such a way that it will really support your organization for overall compliance with all your frameworks. And you really want to get to an opportune point where you can assess once, report multiple times. So regardless if you use a defined approach or a customized approach, having the customized approach objectives really gets you into matching that piece. Now, again, if you aren't completely familiar, you can go into the PCI DSS, read on the customized approach, and I say go back to the global content library, review the global content library customized approach presentation that was recorded in 2022. Now, really in conclusion, PCI DS 4.0, has really opened the door with new technologies to come out, understanding that some defined approaches aren't there. And that was the intent, as we understand it, from the customized approach, so as that a defined approach doesn't work. But now with listing out the objectives, match your one-for-one, match the objectives from your PCI DSS to all of your other frameworks, determine if the defined approach requirements and testing meet the your objectives for all your frameworks, and then move forward. And then so you can really take forward. And so hopefully this has been insightful on just really how you can take the time and save the time of using PCI DSS to match the objectives, and then use the requirements if they're written and then they make sense. So now lastly, I just want to talk about the services that Servadus offers. So we really do work in 3 pillars of management, sustainability, assessments for PCI DSS and other frameworks, and then of course sustainability in from a governance, risk, and compliance. We offer vulnerability management, penetration testing. We have the top-rated staff with multiple certifications and in and beyond PCI DSS, and then of course all our engagements come with an online project management support tool. And so we'd love to see you with questions on how we could help you with Servadus. And so we just recommend that you visit our website. You can go to servadus.com/blog or any of our pages and contact us and book a visit. And we'd love to see you soon. Have a great day.